Beyond Reason Radio.
Yes, Beyond Reason Radio is back for a special edition tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. I know most of you were expecting to hear the Carl Jackson show, which is usually Friday nights at this time. Carl Jackson had to take the night off, so he sent me a message, asked me if I could do Beyond Reason in his stead. I said yes, and here we are. Carl Jackson will be back next week. I believe it's Wednesday, right? He does Wednesdays at 7 and Fridays at 7 usually. So those who are waiting in anticipation to hear him, you'll get to hear him next week. Don't worry about it. But there's a ton of news that we have to talk about from the week. A ton of stuff that was beyond reason, no doubt, which is perfect for this show, Beyond Reason, where I'm your voice of reason, of course, in a world that is beyond reason. We're on until 8 p.m. tonight. And if you want to text the show, you can at 23680, or if you want to call, you can call 407-916-5400. And producing, once again, staying late just for me on a Friday night. I know he usually has hot plans. Maybe he likes to go downtown or something on a Friday night. But he is here with me instead, for Tom Benson.
There's no place I would rather be than here. With thee.
With thee. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't sense any sarcasm in that statement at all.
Plus, they're paying me to do it, so... Yeah.
Well, that always helps, but I know what you get paid, so it's, I would understand if it wasn't enough. So there's a lot of different things I want to get to on the show today, so we're just going to get straight into it. We're going to talk about everything dealing with the Attorney General, Bill Barr, his testimony in front of the Senate, the whole aftermath of the Mueller report, and all of that stuff a little bit later. But I want to start with something a little bit different. And it actually comes from news yesterday from a congresswoman who seems to know, she knows how to get attention for herself. She makes all these controversial statements, sometimes anti-Semitic statements, as you remember. Muslim Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Now, I talked a little bit about this on my other show, PM Orlando, but I wanted to get a little bit more in depth of what this is all about, what her thinking is behind statements like this. And she's not the only one in Congress who thinks like this. There seems to be a growing amount of people in Congress, in the Senate, running for president, in the leftist media, that think like she does, that believes like she does. It's kind of disturbing. But it started yesterday when she was talking with an outlet I had not heard of until yesterday called Democracy Now! And she was asked about Venezuela and what she thinks about the whole situation there. They have an uprising where the interim president says he's the legitimate president, wants to restore the Constitution and democracy in that country, tried to start an uprising against Maduro, and it's failed, unfortunately, mostly because Russia, Cuba, China are involved, of course. But Ilhan Omar was asked about this, and this is what she said.
A lot of the policies that we have put in place has kind of helped lead the devastation in Venezuela, and we've sort of set the stage for where we are arriving today. This particular bullying and the use of sanctions to eventually intervene and make regime change really does not help the people of countries like Venezuela, and it certainly does not help, and it's not in the interest of the United States.
So what does she do? The first chance she gets when she's asked about Venezuela, to talk about what's going on in that country, to talk about maybe supporting those who are against the socialist dictatorship and really want to support regime change, really want to support democracy. What's the first thing that she talks about? She talks about blaming America for what's going on in that country, blaming the United States. That's the first thing that comes out of her mouth, that really what's going on in that country, it's our fault. It's this country's fault. It's the United States' fault. This is a thinking that's going on a lot in the left that, frankly, I'm just going to say it. I think they don't like this country. I think they don't like the history of this country. They don't like the power of this country. They don't like the economic system of this country. They don't like the majority of the people in this country. And they want to radically transform it. When she talks about Venezuela and blames the U.S., that's her thinking. Her mindset is that the United States is the reason why there are so many problems in the world. You know, people like me, conservatives, patriots, we believe America is a shining city on a hill. We believe America is an example of what's good for the rest of the world. But people like Ilhan Omar, of course she's going to blame the United States first because she doesn't like the United States. Now, she'll never admit that part publicly, but it's so obvious. And she's not the only one who is doing this. Recently, Bernie Sanders made news in a town hall. He was asked about voting, because he wants felons to be able to vote in prison. And he even got more radical in the CNN town hall and made a ton of news. We actually talked about this a little bit on PM Orlando as well. And I think this comes from the same type of thinking against this country. This is what Bernie Sanders said.
In my state, what we do is separate. You're paying a price. You committed a crime, you're in jail. That's bad. But you're still living in American society and you have a right to vote. I believe in that. Yes, I do.
So he believes that felons, that was actually the wrong cut, but that's totally my fault. He actually said the same thing in a CNN town hall where he was asked about the Boston bombers. Would you even allow the Boston bombers to vote? And he said, yes, I would allow that because it's a slippery slope or so much, and we have to protect democracy. They're being punished by being in jail, but they should still be able to participate in democracy.
You are separated from society while you're in jail because you can't live in society.
Well, that's the point, and you're being punished for something to do. Part of that punishment is losing your rights while you're serving out that punishment and paying your debt to society.
Can I hear an amen?
The whole point is for you to lose your rights. Voting is a right that you lose. You lose all kinds of other rights when you're in prison as well. It's kind of the point of prison. But what starts this kind of thinking in their mind? Why does he think that way? Well, a lot of Republicans will say, well, they just want more Democratic voters because most of the people in prison are going to vote Democrat. So when Democrats want to push felon voting rights over and over again, the whole purpose, the whole cynical reason behind it is that they want more Democratic voters so more Democrats can be elected and cause change in Washington. There might be some truth to that, but I actually think it goes deeper than that. I really do, and I think it goes back to the whole thing I was just talking about with Ilhan Omar. I think they don't like this country. I think when someone like Bernie Sanders looks at the people in prison, looks at the criminal justice system, looks even at terrorists like the Boston bombers, they blame America for that. That's how Bernie Sanders thinks. Well, the only reason that the Boston bombers hate us is because of American foreign policy. So it's really America's fault that they bombed the Boston Marathon. Or, the thing is, a lot of these people are in prison because America is racist and we just want to lock up black people. The system is unjust, so a lot of those people that are in prison really shouldn't be there in the first place because America has been racist and unjust and the criminal justice system is unfair. And when you have that kind of thinking in your mind, of course you're going to want felons to vote. Of course you're going to want them to be able to vote in prison because they're oppressed. They're the oppressed minority being in prison, and they need to be able to have their voices heard. I guarantee you, if you could somehow get in the head of Bernie Sanders, that's why he wants felons to vote. It's a mindset with a lot of people on the left. They don't like this country. They don't like the history of this country, and they are very, very close to gaining top power in this country. Bernie Sanders is pretty close to being president, a lot closer than any socialist has been in the past, really, unless you include, like, Woodrow Wilson was kind of a socialist, FDR, but I mean, Bernie Sanders is more socialist than they are. Ilhan Omar, what she said about Venezuela, she believes that American intervention has caused most of the problems in the world. And she always wants to blame America first. And so when something like Venezuela comes up, her mind's immediately going to go to, well, it must be America's fault somehow. It must be America's fault somehow that there's so many problems there. Now, let's forget the fact, yes, we have placed sanctions on that country, economic sanctions. That has had somewhat of an effect. But the problems in Venezuela, the economic problems in Venezuela go way beyond the sanctions. It's been going on for years now. It's because the socialists, Hugo Chavez, nationalized industries, redistributed wealth, shut down the media, totally corrupted the system and paid off his cronies rather than using it for the people. And all of that worked until oil prices collapsed. It was all built on oil money that he was seizing through nationalization. Once oil prices collapsed, everything else was collapsing, and now the people are in poverty. It's not because of the United States. It's not because of economic sanctions. It's because the system, from its roots, was corrupt and flawed. But of course, Ilhan Omar is not going to mention that. Ilhan Omar is not going to support the uprising, support democracy. She's going to blame America first. Bernie Sanders is going to blame America first. And this idea with Bernie Sanders goes way back to his honeymoon in the Soviet Union. We all knew that was coming, but there's a lot of stuff coming out now that about his honeymoon over there. There's a whole piece in the Washington Post about it, where he's sympathetic to a lot of things going on in the Soviet Union. It says here, Kelly, the Republican who helped organize the trip, said he and Sanders were naive in thinking that the Soviet system would be profitable for American businesses. Sanders has been on video praising parts of the Soviet Union, praising parts of Castro's Cuba, praising the dictator in Nicaragua. This is how he thinks. And unfortunately, this is how a lot of people on the left think.
He was praising their subway stations. Beautiful artwork.
I know, yes.
Great paintings.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, while the people are starving and having to wait in bread lines and can't even buy jeans. But hey, the subway station's beautiful. There is, some things like that will be beautiful under a government-controlled, centralized system. But that's not the point. The point is, that's not what's most important to a society. That's the whole point. It's like what you said once to me, Tom Benson. They loved Mussolini at first because the trains ran on time.
That's right.
Yeah, they were under a fascist dictatorship that eventually was taken over by the Nazis. But, the trains ran on time, so okay, great. We should adopt some of their systems. It absolutely is beyond reason, and it's really disturbing, actually, to me, that we have members in Congress and we have someone who wants to be president of the United States who fundamentally doesn't like this country. And that's why I really believe. We have to talk a little bit about someone we've had on this show a couple of times. Stephen Moore was nominated to the Federal Reserve Board by President Trump. He has withdrawn that nomination. He has been viciously attacked in the past few weeks. And I have to talk about that. And we'll have that and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I know, though, some of you are expecting the Carl Jackson show. Carl Jackson, my friend Carl Jackson, who usually does a show on Friday nights at 7 p.m. He also does a show Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. He also writes a bunch of columns for Town Hall and other outlets. He couldn't do a show tonight. He will be back next week on Wednesday at 7 p.m. giving his commentary, his conservative commentary on the latest news. So I thank him for letting me do the show tonight. One thing I want to talk about now, and we've had him on the show a few times, and I think he has some very interesting opinions. And I actually read one of his books he co-authored called Fueling Freedom, which had some really good stuff on it about how America could become more energy independent and how a lot of the green energy stuff is a big scam, basically, has a lot of flaws. I know a lot of people on the left don't like him for that. But he was nominated to be on the Federal Reserve Board by President Trump. And all of a sudden, he started facing tons of backlash, tons of criticism. But a lot of that, some of it, had to do with his economic beliefs. He's an unabashed conservative supply-sider who believes in tax cuts, okay. But a lot of it was done by Media Matters and other things going after his family history, his divorce history, combing through every column he's written, even those that were supposed to be jokes, and just totally calling him a sexist and a bigot and an ignoramus and all of this stuff. And he actually talked about this. He withdrew his name for the nomination, and he talked about this on Neil Cavuto yesterday. This is what he said.
The fact is that this kind of sleaze campaign over the last 3 or 4 weeks was just really too tough for me and my family. And, we just decided it was much better for Donald Trump to select someone who doesn't have a 30-year paper trail. I mean, if people were looking at things that I was writing 25 years ago and, looking through my divorce records, and it was too difficult for us.
So basically what he was saying there is it was a smear campaign. One of the criticisms he got, by the way, which I don't really understand, is Media Matters, of course, the leftist outlet that does this. They dug up some comments he made about Fox News women. And he said, people are always asking me, what's Greta Van Susteren really like? And I say, Greta is absolutely perfect for Fox News. She said she's fair, balanced, and blonde. It was a joke because Fox News anchors, sure, most of them are blonde.
Yeah.
And said, and that is the philosophy of Fox News. One of the great things about working at Fox News, I have met a lot of beautiful women at Fox News. It's a great place to work. And they said that was sexist.
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought about this and I said, are we really mad at Steve Moore for calling women beautiful? Is this like there's a part of me that was like, so he called the women there beautiful and we're mad at him about that? Like, I don't understand. So we're not supposed to call women that we think are beautiful. We're not supposed to call them beautiful anymore?
No.
This is not what we're supposed to do now?
No.
I mean, of all the criticisms, I thought that was kind of the weakest. That he said, oh, yeah, the women are beautiful. He said once as a joke, he said, I met a lot of beautiful women at Fox News, including Megyn Kelly. Well, I have to confess, my wife isn't here. I'm in love with Megyn Kelly. He was joking, but you can't,
sure,
you can't joke about that now. Like,
no.
Of course they're beautiful. Have you seen them? But
have you seen a comedian on a college campus lately?
I know. They're afraid to say anything.
Sure.
And that was one of them. But they went after it. Apparently, he was held in contempt of court once, dealing with his divorce, even though apparently now he's on good terms with his ex-wife. But he also, I believe I have another cut from Steve Moore up there. Let's go and play that second cut, continuing on this whole smear campaign against him.
This is kind of a victory lap for the left because they took me down with a smear campaign. And, but it is interesting to me. I'm going to go back to what I just said. If they think my ideas were so, out of the box and so, so wrong, why didn't they debate me on the economic ideas?
Now, there were some people I did see that didn't like his economic ideas, but a lot of it was smearing. He wrote a column saying women shouldn't comment on sports. It was kind of it was kind of supposed to be humorous. He has regretted saying that, but it was meant to be a joke, and everyone was outraged. But his last thing there was interesting. Why don't they want to debate me on my economic policy? I mean, that's what all of this is really about, though. That's why the left went after him like he did. If he was a leftist Keynesian economist, do you honestly think all these people would have gone after him? Do you honestly think Media Matters would have dug up all this stuff about his past? I think there's a couple reasons really why they didn't like Steve Moore. Because he had ideas outside the box that align with Trump's economic beliefs. The other thing is he doesn't have a PhD, you know. He has a master's in economics, but he doesn't have a PhD. And we have to have, you know, we have to have the top of the line PhDs be a part of the Federal Reserve.
He didn't go to Harvard.
So see here. I mean, I really think that's a part. So many criticisms were, well, he's not the traditional elite economist. But that was kind of the point. That's why Trump wanted to put him there, because he had different thinking. And that's Trump's right. And they couldn't handle it. So they dug up everything in his past. And I really think this kind of stuff is disgusting. I mean, I bet half the people who dug up this stuff have worse skeletons in their closets.
Oh, you can bet on it.
Than he does.
That's what I always get about the irony in activists. These people want to tell everybody else how to run their lives, and they can't run their own.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't buy a lot of that. I think they didn't like him because of his beliefs. He said he had a piece in the Wall Street Journal, by the way, talking about this. He goes, you know, what did my divorce and my humor writing have to do with my ability to make monetary policy? He says, I knew that many of my ideas on monetary policy were controversial and outside the box. That's why the president picked me. My central argument is that economic growth does not cause inflation. An assault on the core belief of the Keynesian economists at the Fed, whose fear of supply-side growth has often misdirected monetary policy, most recently late last year. As someone who worked with Mr. Trump as a senior economic advisor to his campaign, I'm thrilled that 3% or 4% growth with stable prices has been achieved, and I believe it can be sustained. But he said, I was naive. I believe that to be confirmed, I would simply need to defend these ideas and my free market economic philosophy in general. I relish that debate, especially because so many of my harshest critics were completely wrong about the Trump economy. A majority in the Senate viewed my economic policy expertise favorably, and my confirmation seemed likely. But he said, what did me in was not my economic ideas, but gutter campaign tactics and personal assaults. I've been called an adulterer, a misogynist, a tax cheat, a deadbeat dad, anti-gay, and mentally unfit. A Washington Post editorial warned that I was a dangerous pick for the Fed, and a columnist said I could cause a global financial calamity. They must imagine I have super heroic powers of persuasion. If appointed, I would have been one of 7 Fed governors. So Steve Moore, nominated to the Fed. We've had him on this show many different times. Yes, he's outside the box thinking. But that, I believe all of this was about the fact that he wasn't a leftist and he wasn't an elitist. And that's really why they didn't get him on. You know, some of these elitist economists that have been at the Fed, they get stuff wrong all the time. And yet they're not decried like this. Very interesting. Okay, so someone else who's being bashed in the media and bashed by the left is the Attorney General. Going to talk about that next. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. Special edition of Beyond Reason Radio tonight because usually Carl Jackson is on at this time for the Carl Jackson Show, but he couldn't make it tonight. He asked me to do my show in his stead. I appreciate it. He will be back next week, next Wednesday night at 7 p.m. and, of course, next Friday night at 7 p.m. as well. Now, one of the big news items of the week, we talked about it on PM Orlando and on the morning show a bunch, is the Attorney General, William Barr, facing all kinds of heat by Democrats. He refused to go to the House Judiciary Committee. Now they want to hold him in contempt, even though he wasn't subpoenaed, so they can't do that. I'm going to get to that later in the show. But he's being called all kinds of things now because he testified to the Senate. Now, the first person, well, not really the first person, I take that back. Everyone's calling him every kind of name. But one person who's totally called him out was Nancy Pelosi earlier this week. Tom Benson, let's go ahead and hear what Nancy Pelosi had to say about the Attorney General this week.
He lied to Congress. He lied to Congress. If anybody else did that, it would be considered a crime. Nobody is above the law, not the President of the United States and not the Attorney General. What is deadly serious about it is the Attorney General of the United States of America was not telling the truth to the Congress of the United States. That's a crime.
So basically they said he lied to Congress. This is the accusation now, that the Attorney General lied to Congress weeks ago when he testified to the House Judiciary Committee. And basically, they say he lied about the letter he received from Mueller's team that they were concerned about his summary. So William Barr, before he put out the full report, put out a summary of the findings of the report. Mueller's team sent him a letter saying they were concerned about it. Not that anything was inaccurate, but that they were concerned about the findings. And so when they say he lied, it happened when he was questioned by Charlie Crist, our own Florida representative. In fact, I have that exchange here. This is the questioning where they say Attorney General Bill Barr lied.
Reports have emerged recently, General, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter, that it does not adequately or accurately necessarily portray the report's findings. Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't. I suspect that they probably wanted, more put out.
So he was asked specifically about media reports that people on Mueller's team were frustrated that his thing didn't accurately, his summary didn't accurately say what was in the Mueller report. Bill Barr responds and says, I don't really know what they're referring to. I suspect they wanted more to be put out, which is exactly what happened. So in the specific report, in the specific media reports, he goes, I don't know exactly what they're referring to in these media reports, but I suspect it's this thing. And he suspected that because he talked to Mueller about it earlier in the week. My whole point on this is they're going to have a hard time proving that this was him lying to Congress. When you listen to that whole conversation in context, it doesn't seem like Bill Barr was lying. But there you go. Now, the other thing that came up, and I might have to skip ahead here. I'm not sure what the order was I put in there, Tom Benson. But this is the other thing that I've heard a lot from people criticizing Bill Barr. It's something Kamala Harris said. Kamala Harris questioned Bill Barr on the obstruction part. Mueller said he's not going to decide either way if the president obstructed justice. Kamala Harris, who's running for president now, asked him about it. This is what she said.
Is in reaching your conclusion, did you personally review all of the underlying evidence?
No, we took and accepted.
Did Mr. Rosenstein?
No, we accepted the statements in the report as the factual record. We did not go underneath it to see whether or not they were accurate. We accepted it as accurate and made our.
So you accepted the report as the evidence?
Yes.
You did not question or look at the underlying evidence that supports the conclusions in the report?
No.
So they're upset because he looked at the evidence presented to him by the person investigating this, Mueller. And they're saying, well, what he should have done is done his own investigation into the underlying evidence of Mueller to see if Mueller was accurate and then decided whether to charge him of obstruction. Why would he do that? Why would anyone do that? The whole purpose of Mueller doing this investigation is so he could have a report, then the Attorney General could look at the report and make a determination based on the report. But you want him to do an investigation even though his department has already done an investigation? What? An investigation into the investigation? Should someone do an investigation into his investigation of the investigation? But this is one of, he didn't look at the underlying evidence. He looked at the evidence presented to him and made a decision. As the Attorney General, Mueller was under the Department of Justice, did the investigation, came out with the report with the evidence, and placed it to the Attorney General. Then the Attorney General makes a decision based on the evidence presented to him. That's how this works. This idea now that, he shouldn't have trusted Mueller and looked more deeply into it. What? I thought we were supposed to trust Mueller. I just don't buy it. And they have been harping on that this whole time. But I really just don't buy it. And then something else came out. Remember when William Barr, the last time he testified, a few weeks ago, all this controversy because he said this.
I think spying on a political campaign is a big deal. Yes, I think spying did occur. Yeah. The question is whether it was adequately predicated. And I'm not suggesting it wasn't adequately predicated, but I need to explore that. I am not saying that improper surveillance occurred. I'm saying that I am concerned about it and looking into it. That's all.
And when this came out, this became a big controversy. And I remember saying at the time, I didn't expect this to be a controversy because we already knew this was true. We already knew that the FBI was spying on the Trump campaign. That's how all of this started, their investigation. And he admits there that we don't know if it was improper spying. We have to look into that, but there was spying. How could you use the term spying? Well, but that's what it was. Surveillance, spying, these are terms that are used all the time when you're spying. Well, now you have the New York Times coming out, which Trump even talked about, admitting that they basically had a spy, an informant, go to Papadopoulos and try to get information on Trump's ties to Russia. Basically admitting in this New York Times report that, yes, the FBI was spying on the Trump campaign. So all of this decrying over what Bill Barr said, which there was a very reasonable statement. Well, yeah, of course there was spying. We don't know if it was improper. We have to look into that. But yes, of course there was some spying. That's how all of this started. And now we have even more proof that we're spying because the FBI in this New York Times report admits that they sent an informant to look into Papadopoulos. It's just amazing how all of this stuff seems to be controversial on the surface when you watch MSNBC. And when then you actually look into it, you're like, wait, what? It really is just beyond reason. Now, one person who is really a voice of reason on all of this, Andrew McCarthy. He writes for the National Review. He's been covering the Mueller report. He does a lot of legal analysis. He was on Fox News earlier this week, and he was talking about how they call Bill Barr a liar. They want to hold him in contempt because he didn't show up to the House Judiciary Committee hearing when he should have shown up. And he just says this is all ridiculous.
A lot of this is sheer theater.
No.
Well, I mean, even more theater than normal Washington theater, which is the theater of the absurd. Barr, this was not an appearance under subpoena. All this talk about he may be held in contempt any minute now. They're not close to holding him in contempt. He can't be in contempt until he has flouted some kind of legal process, right? What happened here was he wasn't even asked to come. He volunteered to come to the Senate and the House on 2 consecutive days. And when you're a volunteer, as opposed to being summoned by compulsion, you can negotiate the terms of your appearance.
Now, that kind of changes the narrative a little bit, doesn't it? They're all saying that he's afraid, that he should be held in contempt. And he volunteered. He doesn't have to show up. He didn't have to show up to the Senate hearing. Now, Kimberly Strassel, who I really like, wrote for the Wall Street Journal on this. She says that the whole reason why the Democrats are going after the Attorney General like this is because they're fearful of what he has or what he's going to find. Because they're going to start looking into the investigation of the investigators. They're going to start looking at the FISA applications and how all of this started. And she says they have to bash the Attorney General now before all that comes out because they want to ruin his credibility ahead of time. He says some of this is frustration. Democrats foolishly invested 2 years of political capital in the idea that Mr. Mueller would prove President Trump had colluded with Russia. That's what Kimberly Strassel is saying in the Wall Street Journal. And then she continues on. But most of it is likely fear. Mr. Barr made real news in the Senate hearing, and while the press didn't notice, Democrats did. The Attorney General said he already assigned people at the Justice Department to assist his investigation of the origins of the Trump-Russia probe. He said his review would be far-reaching, that he was obtaining details from congressional investigations, from the ongoing probe by the department's Inspector General, and even from Mr. Mueller's work. Mr. Barr said the investigation wouldn't focus only on the fall 2016 justifications for secret surveillance warrants against Trump team members, but would go back months earlier. Basically, what she's saying is the Democrats protest a little too much and that they're actually afraid. Very interesting stuff in this Beyond Reason week dealing with the Attorney General. Hopefully, I was able to be a voice of reason on that for you. Much more to get to on the show. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. I am here tonight on a special edition of the show because Carl Jackson had to take the night off and he asked me to fill in, and I said, sure. But he will be back next week, next Wednesday at 7, and of course next Friday at 7 as well. Good friend of mine, just couldn't do the show tonight, so he asked me to fill in, and I thank him so much. It's an honor and privilege to be able to do that for him. So, Tom Benson, I was just looking at the screen, and why didn't you tell me the big breaking news of the day that Meghan Markle could have a baby at any moment?
Really?
She could have her baby at any... I would have led the show with that, Tom Benson. It's the big news, and you didn't even tell me that.
Well, Monday's coming, and if she has it over the weekend, you can break the news on Monday.
Okay, I guess. My audience is just so upset about it. I wasn't updating on that. No, actually, we have a lot more important things to get to. I actually have a pretty disturbing story.
Mm-hmm.
That really is not getting the attention it deserves. But it should. I actually found it from the BBC of all places. It says here, Christian persecution around the world is at near genocide levels. You know, it's amazing when you read the history of the Christian church and you hear about all the persecutions that happened, you know, in the early church, in the second century and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, that's in the past. You know, that was such a bad time for Christianity, but things are so much better now. Unfortunately, in most of the world, things are not better now. And this doesn't get enough attention. The review, which was led by the Bishop of Truro, the Right Reverend Philip Mount Stephen, estimated that 1 in 3 people suffer from religious persecution. It also found that Christians were the most persecuted religious group. Mr. Hunt said he felt that political correctness had played a part in the issue not being confronted. No, that happened over with the Sri Lanka attacks. Obama and the like were saying it was Easter worshipers.
Yes.
They were like afraid to say the word Christian, which was utterly bizarre.
Don't want to upset anyone now.
Yeah, it says here, the interim report said the main impact of genocidal acts against Christians is exodus, and that Christianity faced being wiped out from parts of the Middle East. We are actually living in a time, we're so blessed here in the United States that we don't even realize it, But we're living in a time where more Christians are being slaughtered than almost ever.
A lot of it in Africa.
In Africa and Asia and the Middle East.
And there's also a lot of persecution going up in Egypt.
Yep. It said it warned that the religion is at risk of disappearing in some parts of the world, pointing to figures which claim Christians in Palestine represent less than 1.5% of the population, while in Iraq they had fallen from 1.5 million before 2003 to less than 120,000. Think about that. And that's all because of ISIS. It says evidence shows what the bishop wrote. Evidence shows not only the geographic spread of anti-Christian persecution, but also its increasing severity. In some regions, the level and nature of persecution is arguably coming close to meeting the international definition of genocide. It's according to that adopted by the UN. The Foreign Secretary commissioned the review on Boxing Day 2018 amid an outcry over the treatment of Asia Bibi, a Christian woman who faced death threats after being acquitted of blasphemy in Pakistan. Its findings come after more than 250 people were killed and more than 500 wounded in attacks at hotels and churches in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. Mr. Hunt, who was on a week-long tour of Africa, said he thought governments had been asleep, which they definitely have been, over the persecution of Christians, but that this report and the attacks in Sri Lanka had woken everyone up with an enormous shock. He added, I think there is a misplaced worry that it is somehow colonialist to talk about a religion that was associated with colonial powers rather than countries that we marched into as colonizers. He said that has perhaps created an awkwardness in talking about this issue. The role of the missionaries was always a controversial one, and that has, I think, also led some people to shy away from this topic. So political correctness, the hatred of Western civilization, once again, that's where a lot of this comes from. They don't like Western civilization and its history. Of course, Western civilization has its roots in Christianity. Oh, well, you can't praise Western civilization, so we can't talk about this. And because they don't want to deal with it, millions, possibly millions of Christians in the world right now are on the threat of disappearing. And it's something we have to address. You know, when there's Muslim genocide, you know, there was an attack on a mosque, you know, in New Zealand. Everyone was talking about what we need to do to protect Muslim communities. Everyone was for that. And that's understandable. Religious freedom is important for all religions. But when there's Christian genocide, everyone is silent. They're all silent. And of course, the reason why they are is once again because they hate our history. The left, they're so obsessed with political correctness and intersectionality and all of these, these identity politics, and they hate the history of Western civilization so much that they're willing to ignore a genocide on one of the world's biggest religions. It's sad, but, you know, Jesus warned us about that, said Christians would be persecuted. But, of course, in the end, we have victory in Jesus Christ. Anyway, but it's still sad to see. All right, that is the show, Beyond Reason Radio. Another one done. If you missed any of the show, and catch the podcast anywhere that podcasts are available. And thank Carl Jackson for letting me do the show, and I'll catch you guys next time.